In May 2026, Russia did something that sent shockwaves through every major defense ministry in the Western world. Over 3 days, they rolled out more than 65,000 troops, 200 missile launchers, 140 aircraft, and 13 submarines, including nuclear submarines, for a massive military exercise specifically designed to rehearse the launch of nuclear weapons. And they announced it with almost no warning. Now, the easy reaction is to say, this is just Putin rattling his saber again. He's been doing it for years. It's a bluff. Move on. But here's the thing, the people whose entire job is to assess that question, they're not so sure anymore. Let's start with what actually happened in May 2026 because the details matter. Russia launched what they called a suddenly announced exercise of their strategic nuclear forces. The drills ran from May 19th to May 21st, and according to defense analysts, the timing was not random. Just days before the drills began, Ukraine had intensified drone and missile strikes on Russian territory. Russia was losing ground in the narrative war. And within hours of Putin departing for a 2-day visit to China, a visit meant to project strength, the nuclear drills kicked off. That combination of timing is important, because according to analysts at the German Council on Foreign Relations, Russia's nuclear signaling steps in May 2026 closely correlated with negative developments for Russia in its war against Ukraine. In other words, when Russia is struggling on the battlefield, the nuclear threats get louder. This wasn't even the only nuclear exercise that month. On May 12th, just days before the large-scale drills, Russia had already conducted a separate ICBM test launch. 2 nuclear exercises. 1 month. That's not routine. To understand whether this is a bluff, you need to understand something that happened in November 2024, and most people either forgot about it or never understood its full significance. Putin signed a brand new nuclear doctrine. Russia's previous doctrine said they could use nuclear weapons when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy. That's a pretty high bar, an almost last resort condition. The 2024 doctrine changed that language. Now it reads, nuclear weapons can be used when there is aggression with conventional weapons creating a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That is a meaningfully lower threshold. It's the difference between we're about to be destroyed and we're losing badly and feel threatened. The doctrine also added something new. It extended Russia's nuclear umbrella to Belarus, meaning any attack on Belarusian territory could trigger a Russian nuclear response. And it stated that a conventional attack on Russia by any country supported by a nuclear power would be considered a joint attack. That last part is essentially directed at NATO and the United States. Now, experts are divided on how seriously to take this. The United States Institute of Peace described the 2024 changes as one of Russia's latest escalatory steps designed to amplify fears of nuclear escalation. The Stimson Center argued that while the doctrine lowers the threshold on paper, it doesn't necessarily require the US to change its own strategy. And the European Leadership Network noted bluntly that Putin's nuclear threats, despite years of repetition, have not fundamentally reshaped Western policy. So is the Doctrine Shift a bluff? Probably, in part. But it's a bluff that keeps getting doubled down on, and that matters. Here's the part of this story that almost nobody is covering, and it may be the most important piece of the puzzle. Russia has been quietly building a forward operating base for a missile called the Oreshnik, an intermediate-range ballistic missile on Belarusian soil, right on NATO's doorstep. And here's what makes this especially significant. The Oreshnik has already been used in combat. In May 2026, it was fired at Ukraine using conventional warheads. Why does that matter? Because a missile that exists in both conventional and nuclear variants, and that has already been used in an active war, is not theoretical. It's operational. It's deployed. And it's sitting in Belarus, which shares a border with 3 NATO member states, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. The SIPRI Yearbook, one of the most respected arms monitoring organizations in the world, flagged this development in their most recent assessment as a significant shift in Russia's nuclear posture. This is not a missile that lives in a silo somewhere in Siberia. It's next door. Let's talk about what the people with access to classified information actually believe, because it's more nuanced than what you'll hear on cable news. The US Defense Intelligence Agency stated in 2025 that Russia is very unlikely to use nuclear weapons in the conflict, unless Russian leadership judged it faced an existential threat to the regime. That sounds reassuring, but read the second half of the sentence. Unless they faced an existential threat. The question is, who defines existential? Putin does. And the 2026 annual threat assessment went further, explicitly identifying what US intelligence now considers the most dangerous threat from Russia. Not a surprise conventional attack, not cyber warfare. The assessment pointed to an escalatory spiral, a situation where a conflict gradually intensifies, both sides keep responding, and the ladder of escalation gets climbed one step at a time until someone reaches for the nuclear option. Crucially, the 2026 assessment specifically flagged concern about deliberate escalation, not just accidental. That's a significant change in language from the previous year, which only discussed the risk of unintended escalation. The intelligence community is telling us the danger isn't necessarily that Putin wakes up one morning and decides to launch. The danger is that a series of smaller decisions on both sides creates a situation where the pressure to escalate becomes overwhelming. Okay. So after all of that, is Russia's nuclear threat a bluff? Here's the honest answer. It's both. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. On one hand, yes, there are strong reasons to believe Russia is using nuclear threats primarily as a political tool. Putin has been making these threats since 2022. The West has responded by gradually doing more and more to support Ukraine anyway: long-range missiles, advanced air defense, deep strike capabilities. Each time Russia threatened, the West tested the line, and Russia didn't follow through. The European Leadership Network called this the boy who cried wolf problem. Russia has overused nuclear threats to the point where their credibility is being eroded. On the other hand, the risks of assuming it's all a bluff are catastrophic. A 2024 leaked Russian military document showed that Russia's internal threshold for tactical nuclear weapons use is actually lower than they've ever publicly admitted, including the possibility of using them for what the document called fear inducement. That's not a last resort. That's a weapon of intimidation. And here's the key insight that most coverage misses. The question isn't whether Putin wants to use nuclear weapons. Almost certainly, he doesn't. The question is whether a deteriorating military situation, combined with an escalatory spiral, could create conditions where he feels he has to, or where a miscalculation by either side triggers something nobody intended.